So good evening, and tonight we're going to talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness certainly has become very topical. Cover of Time magazine, cover of Scientific American, advertisements for the mindful living community, the mindful realtor. So in Western society, what do we think of when we think of mindfulness? The concept is that we are in the moment, present to what we are doing. If we're dancing, eating our food, doing art or photography, we are there. But that's only a small part of what mindfulness truly is. And it has a very broad definition. The essence is that this is a process that allows us to change the relationship we have with each and every moment. That we can be present and meet each moment with acceptance, awareness, compassion, and non-attachment. It's that ability to be not free from pain and suffering, but the ability to be free with pain and suffering. I like to look at mindfulness as having the components of air, A-I-R. And just as air is essential for our physical survival, I look at mindfulness as being the air for our emotional and mental survival. So mindfulness really has three components. The first one is awareness. Can you be present to what is going on in your experience? Second, and I think the second one is probably the most significant element of mindfulness. Insight, wisdom. It's not what you know, but it is why you are having your experience. What is the truth to what you are experiencing? Can you see that everything has a sense of illusion and delusion? It's truly seeing what our experience is, that it is all constructed, that it's all conditional, that allows us to change our relationship to the moment. If there's nothing that we need to defend, then we can simply be present from that place of innate loving kindness and compassion. Mindfulness comes from an ancient Indian Pali word, sati. And sati means to remember. Not memory remembering, but remembering to have an active, watchful mind. John Lennon of Beatles fame had it right. And what did he say? Life is what's happening while we are busy making other plans that were never really present to our experience. So let's explore the first component, and that is of awareness. So just think, how many of you, before you get out of bed, you're going over what happened the day before, you're planning for the next day or today. You're in the shower, that beautiful hot water, but are you really enjoying it? Or is your mind somewhere else? You eat your breakfast. Who ate the food? What did it taste like? You get in your car, you drive from home to work. My God, who was driving the car? How did you get from A to B? You have conversations all day. Are you really there? And why is it that we're never truly present? It's because we are so distracted to what we do in our experience. So we get up in the morning and we have our breakfast, and what are we doing? We're on our smartphones looking at our emails, newspapers in front of us, the TV is on. We have a conversation with someone, and where is our mind? Is it really present to that person? Or are we thinking about what's going on that we need to do? We're on the phone with somebody, and what are we doing? We're checking our emails. So I know that all of us, well, I guess I can only say I am guilty. I don't know what you do, but I know I'm guilty of doing that. And so I'm not always present and mindful to the experience. They say that we have 60,000 thoughts a day. 90% are of the past or the future. 50% of the time we are truly present. And if Google says it, it must be right. Attention span of the human, 8 seconds. Attention span of the next important species, a goldfish, 9 seconds. So let's do an experiment now that really looks at how are we truly able to be present to what's going on in our experience. So I'd ask that if you could sit up straight, close your eyes. And we're just going to really see how attentive we can be to our experience. And what we're going to do is when we take an in-breath, we count 1. We take an out-breath, we count 1. The next in-breath is 2, the next out-breath is 3, and we do that till we get to 10. Sounds simple, right? However, if you have a thought, you need to go back to 1. So let's try this experiment. So let's bring that experiment to a close. Open our eyes. So, who got to 10?
But I have to count on.
That's okay. I had to count on your fingers. That's very interesting. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's amazing how our minds just keep thinking. We're never going to stop it. Remember, only 2 ways to stop your mind from being silent. Being in a coma and death. And that's not what we're here to learn about. But it does demonstrate how active our minds are. So why is it important to be in the present moment? Well, as they say, it is the only moment we have. Why not enjoy life instead of the created fantasies that we are always experiencing? And when we are not present to the moment, our brains go into what's called a default mode. What that means is that when it doesn't have something to focus on, our minds start to think and they fantasize. So focusing our mind helps to prevent that proliferation of thought. So let's look at this a little bit more carefully now in terms of how can we develop awareness of the present moment. Let's do another experiment. I'd ask you again to sit up straight and close your eyes. And what I would ask you to do is, can you bring awareness to what is present in your consciousness? That if you have a dominant thought, emotion, story, physical sensation, can you simply be aware of that? See what happens. So let's bring that to a close. I know when I do this experiment with other people, the comments that I get are, my mind is very active. That often what happens is that we really become and are the star of the stories of our mind. That our minds are so slippery, that we have a story that comes along, we become the eye of the story without any awareness of knowing what the story is. What I'm going to share with you now is one of the most essential techniques that you can do to understand what awareness is. How to bring yourself into the present moment. Our minds are like dogs. If you throw them a bone, they're going to chase after it. So we have the ability to use language to bring our mind to awareness. So the question that you ask your mind when something arises is, what is present? And then I would ask you to then label the experience. When I say label, what I mean is we're more interested in process, not content. It's not that you're reliving the story. Did you see what Joe did today? He talked to me in a really rude way. He is so disrespectful. I don't like that person. That's not what I'm asking you to do when I say label. I'm asking you to label it in terms of process. What do I mean by process? It can be as generic as thinking, or criticizing, evaluating, judging, planning. It could be feeling, sadness, anger, surprise. It could be physical discomfort, squeezing, pins and needles. So what we're really trying to do is bring our awareness to what is present in the moment. And by labeling the experience, you ground yourself into the moment. The other important point is when you label, you don't use the word I. Because we'll get into that later, because it's the presence of the sense of I that truly causes your suffering. So this is the key point that we are trying to do here. We are trying to use language to bring ourselves to the moment and label the experience to see what happens. So let's try that experiment again. And I would ask that you again sit up, close your eyes, be open to whatever arises in your awareness. But this time, either ask yourself what is present or directly go to labeling the experience. Process, not content. No use of the word I. All we're asking you to do is just label what you become aware of. So we'll bring that to a close. Again, when I do that experiment with other people, there seems to be something about being able to name your experience. And in essence, one word truly defines mindfulness. When you're able to label your experience, you have to be present to what is going on. Because if you're saying thinking, planning, judging, sadness, anger, you have to be present to the moment. First thing. When you do that, there seems to be this observer effect of mindfulness. When you shine the light of mindfulness onto something, it seems to slow it down and to freeze it. So what that does is it creates a very powerful pause. We operate as these automatic robots, at least our minds do. We get a stimulus, we react to it, we react to it. But when you bring mindfulness to an event and you label it, you anchor yourself into the present moment, you create the pause, and you're able to step back from being connected to what you are experiencing. So in essence, one word defines being present, knowing what you know, and changing your relationship. They say that if you can name it, you can tame it. Matthew Lieberman, a researcher in California, did MRI, brain scan studies, on people who were able to name their experience. And what they discovered was, again, increased activity in the executive function of the brain, the left prefrontal cortex, that decreases emotional reactivity, and a decrease in activity in the amygdala, which is that center for fear. So labeling your experience has tremendous value for what you need to do. So why don't we do this? You know, we're very complacent. And we need to be motivated to go ahead and practice mindfulness and being present. So I would assume that all of you are here, not because you're 100% happy or enlightened, but there must be something going on that's causing some sense of perhaps stress or discomfort, and you're here to learn some tool to help you feel better. That's natural. That's what we're all trying to do. So that has to be a very motivating factor. You just need to ask yourself, am I happy? Can I be happier? What do I need to do that? If I can practice mindfulness, then I have a key. You know, the reality is that we will all die. And the reality is we could all die today. No one knows that, right? So if there isn't a stronger motivating force than knowing that we may die at any time, and we only have that much of time perhaps, or that length, but we never know, then what else motivates you more to practice mindfulness? Cues are very important to bring you to the present moment. You know, we would all be mindful if we could only remember to be mindful. The first component of mindfulness, which is awareness, is actually the easiest one to do, because we can rely on cues so that we can remember to be mindful. And what are those cues? We can get apps on our phones. We can have post-it notes put on the fridge or the bathroom, alarms on our phones, or we can link an activity to an event. In other words, whenever I get up and go to the bathroom, that's a cue to be aware. Before I turn my computer on, after I answer my phone, when I'm waiting in line, when I'm stopping at a red light. So one can use activities during the day to link and remind you to be mindful. There's another component of awareness called metacognition. And that means, do you know what you know? This is a tremendous evolutionary adaptation. Only humans can know what they know. John A. Macdonald, when Canada was being created and they created the Senate, said this was going to be the chamber of sober second thought. I look at metacognition as the chamber of sober second thought. I mean, why is it important that we know what we know? And my belief system is that our minds are always trying to find balance, always trying to find homeostasis, always trying to make sure what we're going to do is safe. So, what better concept that my mind creates something and then I'm going to have the ability to check whether it's valuable or not. So I think metacognition, a component of mindfulness, is that Senate, that chamber of sober second thought. The only problem is, like the Senate, we haven't used it very well as humans. So, let's try this experiment to see what I mean by know what you know. I'd ask you to sit up straight again and close your eyes. And I'd like you just to be aware. And whatever comes into your awareness, can you imagine that you are just sitting in an audience, just like you're doing right now? And what is coming up in your awareness, you can visualize it as if it is on a stage or a screen. So what you're doing is you're simply stepping back and observing what's going on in your mind from a space that is removed from the direct ownership of the experience. Can you imagine sitting in the audience and just watching what is occurring moment to moment in your experience? And can you bring to memory an event where you felt anger? And just sit in the audience and see what unfolds. And can you bring to memory an event of sadness? And just sit in the audience and watch what unfolds. And can you now ask the question, who or what knows what is known? Don't look for the answer. Don't try and create an answer. Just be open to what comes. Who or what knows what is known? I'm going to bring that exercise to a close. So I hope you had a sense of what it would be like to step back from the experience. And in terms of that last question, it's a bit like a tongue twister. That's a bit of a mind twister. Who or what knows what is known? You know, we all know what we know, but what is it that knows what we know? It's like the Supreme Court Justice Potter, who was asked to define pornography. And his comment was, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. We all know what our awareness is, but it may be difficult to define. So that's the first component of mindfulness. Awareness. Be present to what is occurring, know what you know, and you can support that by asking yourself the question, what is present? And label it. And in doing that, you've anchored yourself in the moment. You've had to step back to know what there is. You've created the pause, and you've allowed yourself to now have an experience that you can examine. And that brings us to the next important component of mindfulness. Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living for a human being. When I talk about insight or wisdom, it's not, do you have a lot of knowledge? What I'm really talking about is, can you see the truth of experience? What is a thought? What is an emotion? How is it constructed? Why does it hold on to us so tightly? So we're really going to look at understanding the truth of our experience. And I believe that this aspect is where freedom comes from. Because if we understand what it is that we encounter moment to moment, and we are not owned by it, that is where the freedom comes. Let's look at this process of how our mind works. Normally we have what I call a steps process. It may not necessarily follow this sequence, but all these components are present. A stimulus comes along. I buy the shirt. A thought comes. Oh my God, this is too expensive. What have I done? I shouldn't have bought the shirt. This is too expensive. I made a mistake. E, emotion. There's a sense of fear, of anxiety. P, physical sensation. I'm starting to feel that cramping in my abdomen, that fluttering feeling. And ultimately there is an S, a solution. And I don't mean that I return the shirt or buy another one. It means, what is my relationship to that event? Is it something I want and I'm going to grab onto it, or something I deny and I want to push it away? So all of us experience this steps process in whatever we encounter. And nothing exists independently. In other words, you don't have a thought without an emotion or a physical sensation. You don't have an emotion without a thought or a physical sensation. And physical sensations don't exist independently. So everything is interconnected. This process is easy to identify when we have something that's external to us. I see the car, I respond to it. I see a person, I respond to it. The trickier situation comes when often we have an internal thought, memory, or emotion. Our brains work so quickly that we're not with the thought, we're simply with the response. That sense of evaluation, judgment, and feeling. It really is very, very interesting to start to train yourself to look for that original thought. You know, sometimes all of a sudden you're just having these thoughts that are coming in, these criticizing thoughts of who you are. You're having this squeezing sensation in your belly. You're feeling sad, but you don't know why it's come about. That's because what's happened is your mind has worked so quickly that it's had a memory of something, it's responded to it, lightning speed, and you're just left with the consequences. You can slowly retrain yourself to look for the initial stimulus. And personally, I find that fascinating. So I bought a shirt, and now I've created this story. It seems ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. And in identifying the initial thought and the reaction, or even going back to the whole steps process, what you do is you slow your mind down. It's not going, but it's slowing down because you're having to look for the parts of the process. And in doing that, your mind can't proliferate its thoughts so easily. We talked about this the first time, and that is beliefs. And this is the key to understanding, what is this voice? What is this sense of I that we believe ourselves to be? And to briefly summarize, we all come into this world where are these small, defenseless little creatures. We're dependent upon our caregivers. We will do whatever we can and whatever we need to do to feel safe, loved, and worthy. That we all create coping strategies in order to deal with our core woundings and vulnerabilities. That inner voice that we have that is constantly telling us, criticizing, judging, evaluating, is just trying to keep us safe. That sense of I identifies with that belief system, and that sense of I just gets layered over it. So that voice that we believe ourselves to be is a message from the past that is being relived in the present moment. And as we did that experiment before, where we looked at what were our unmet needs, we can see that they play out today, and that what we do moment to moment is not based on these adult perspectives of, I bought the shirt, it's too expensive, that's not good. But the deeper meaning is I may not be loved because I didn't follow my belief system. And this is a very important part in loosening the ties to that sense of I that owns us and creates our stress. Often it can be very difficult to just be with the thoughts and the emotions. They're very powerful. They're overwhelming. The way to get around that is often we have a dominant word that we use. I am bad. I am terrible. I should never have done that. I'm useless. That one word you have. My word is terrible. When something comes along and I don't do it right, my mind says, oh, this is terrible. I'm terrible. A very neat trick that you can do to help decouple yourself from the story is just be aware of the word and let it repeat itself on and on and on. Has anything ever lasted forever in your experience? Never. And so I find it very fascinating that if something comes up and it's grabbing me, one technique is simply to be with, this is terrible. And I allow myself to keep saying terrible, 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 terrible. And you know what? It stops. It just becomes a word without a story, without energy. We all are faced with fear, with sadness, with anger. And you know, when these things arise, they are real. They're real like steel. But have any one of you ever really turned to that fear, that sadness, that criticism, and really looked at it to see what it truly is? So we're going to do an experiment that looks at what is what is. And what I mean by that is, what is present? Fear is present. Sadness is present. And the question is, what is fear? So, if I might ask you to sit up straight, close your eyes. And I would ask you to bring to memory an event where you felt criticized or unloved or judged. And now I would ask you, can you turn to that sense of criticism, judgment, feeling unlovable, and simply look at it, face it, turn to it, and ask, what is criticism? What is it like? What is to feel unloved? And simply allow whatever comes into your awareness. What is, turn to it, face it, experience it, allow whatever arises to arise. just open your eyes, please? We'll bring that to a close. So often when I do this experiment with people, what comes up is that when they turn to it, two things happen. It's very hard to define what fear, sadness, anger is. But what people are left with is the physical experience of what fear, anger, and sadness is. That for many people, that is how they experience it. That is how it is defined. That it becomes a physical experience. Because can you point to fear or sadness? Does it have boundaries? Can you define it? So this is a very crucial part of mindfulness. This ability to embody your experience. What do I mean by embody? It means get into the body and feel what you are experiencing as a direct physical experience. That move beyond the thought, move beyond the emotion, and rest in the body. The body is very neutral. When we have a thought or a story, it's very strong, it grabs us. Hard to let go. But when you rest in the body, it's much easier just to rest with the sensation than it is with the story. Because you remember we said before, pain is expected, suffering is optional. That the direct physical experience is not the problem. It's the story that is associated with the physical feeling. So embodying your experience is a very potent technique of mindfulness. That you are aware of what is happening, but you are bringing your awareness not to the thought, not to the emotion, but to the physical sensation of what you are experiencing. So, is there an I? Jerry Seinfeld very appropriately said, it is a show about nothing. And that's probably what the I is. And the key element of Buddhism is that anything you attach to as me or mine leads to suffering. It is the sense of I that owns the story that leads to the suffering. It's the sense that everything gets referenced back to this belief that I have made a mistake. I may be punished. I may be criticized. So the important question is there really an I? How many people here believe that there is this command post behind our eyes that sees everything, controls everything, thinks everything, and that's where that I is located? And that's okay, because that's a common belief. So, do we have an I behind our I? So, how about science? What does science say? Well, we have a lot of these MRI scans of the brain, EEGs. No one has defined a central, localized brain center with all our experiments. How many here know what your next thought is going to be? Do you know what you're going to say next? Free will? Do we really have free will? If I had free will, if you had free will, would your inner voice talk to you the way it talks to you? Would I ever treat myself so badly? If I had free will, I would be saying all the time, Phil, what a great lecture you just gave. As opposed to, who knows what it'll tell me. So, do we have free will? Well, when you really think about it, I'm not so sure. How many times do you operate during the day without a sense of I? So tell me, when you eat, do you say, Phil, you're eating right now? When I go to the bathroom, do I say, Phil? When I'm walking, when I'm driving the car, how many times do you operate during the day without a sense of I that is doing the activity other than the activity being done? Wonderful MRI study. This is really going to have to make you think about brain and mind. They took these people, they put them in MRI scanners. These are special x-rays of the brain. It's very sophisticated. They gave them a clicker in their left hand. They gave them a clicker in their right hand. And they said, when you're ready, choose the left or the right clicker. 6 seconds before the person decided which hand they were going to choose, they could tell on the MRI scan. Who's making all these choices for us? Is it all happening in our brain? And then we become conscious of it, such that our mind and our sense of I is just reflecting what our brain already decided before. They did a similar study. MRI scanners tell people to make decisions. 60% of the time, 6 seconds before, they could decide what they chose. 1 second before, 85% of the time, they could know what the decision of the person was going to be. This is just with MRI scans, it's blood flow. Wait, we're going to see correlations that are probably 100%. For me, this is very compelling. It makes me appreciate the fact that things are occurring in my wonderful brain and that I just become aware of whatever has been decided for me. Let's try this experiment. I'd ask you to sit up straight, close your eyes. And I'm going to give you a series of words. And all I want you to do is just be aware of what comes into your awareness. Favorite holiday? Death. Unexpected bill. Favorite dessert? Work. Let's open our eyes. So I find this a very fascinating experiment because in response to the words, what are the stories your mind tells you? Did you think up those stories, or did they just happen like that? I find that very compelling because the way I look at it is that I accept the fact that my brain makes all these stories, all these thoughts, all these emotions based on biology, my desire to survive, genetics, my predispositions that I've inherited, my gifts, my passions, and my conditioning. And I understand the fact that I am not creating all those things, but I have this wonderful opportunity to be aware of what my mind is telling me. That if you can give up this sense of ownership, of I am doing all of that, to simply being the witness of what is arising, it becomes a very freeing experience. And we have all this wonderful evidence that I've tried to show you, the MRI, and just the fact, this simple experiment of who thought these stories up. You did, of course. But all you have the ability to do is to be aware of the stories. They're happening and unfolding independent of who you are. And it's very, very interesting to look at the steps process. Stimulus, thought, emotion, physical sensation, solution. When you look very carefully, what becomes evident is that in response to a stimulus, I is not there right off the bat. That if you look carefully at this, you get maybe a story, an emotion, a physical feeling, and then the sense of I gets created in response to what is unfolding. So the I is not there all the time. And when you stay with your story and watch, oh my God, I bought this shirt, this is terrible, what am I going to do? I shouldn't have done that. How am I going to handle this? And then it ends. So when it ends, where does the I go? What's left? What's left when the I isn't there? Stillness. There's always a pause between whatever we do if we look close enough. That one thought is not a continuous stream. That we have a thought, it ends. We have a thought, it ends. And you can see this little pause between every experience we have. Nothing is permanent. Everything ends. Our sense of I gets created. Our sense of I dissolves. And if you look to the I in the steps process, if you say, what is present? In other words, what is fear? You turn to it. If you experiment and say, what is I bought the shirt, I made a mistake, I turn to it, what do you find? I'm going to give you a very neat technique that you can use that allows you to step out of the sense of owning the I. In our discussions, we've said that maybe this sense of I is created moment to moment, and that really what it is reflecting is the best our inner child could do to create a coping strategy. That we have created the sense of self, but it is just created. Here's what I'd like you to do. If you could sit up straight and close your eyes. And I'd like you to bring to memory an event where you were feeling criticized or judged. And you can see that or hear it. And I would ask you now to describe it and use the words, my dear, and then your name, Philip. It sounds like you're feeling sad, worried, anxious. I want you to describe what is occurring from the third person perspective. Not I am sad, but my dear Philip, it sounds, it feels like you are having sadness. And how does it feel when you can describe what you are experiencing? As if you are really sort of describing this entity that is not you, that is having the experience. And it's important to approach that from the perspective of being the compassionate friend. You're not judging this sense of who you are. You're bringing compassion to it. Now I ask you to open your eyes now. This is a very powerful technique that you can use when you are in the midst of something. And that what it allows you to do, it allows you to step out of the ownership of what is happening. And in essence, you are describing the reality of what is happening. That this is this inner child that you are, that is doing the best it can do for who you are in the moment. And that third person perspective gives you the distance, allows you to step back and observe. Gives you that metacognition. Know what you know. And another very powerful experience is to do that same experiment, but describe it without using the word I. Because as we said, the reason why the stress develops is not because of events. It's because of the meaning that we put over the events as it references back to the sense of I. So in that experiment with the shirt, a shirt was bought, anxiety, fear is present. But there isn't the I that's owning the fear. So, interesting. Describe the events as they are unfolding in front of you without using the word I. Another technique to step back and to simply describe what is occurring without the added meaning of the I that is present. So, is there an I? I don't think so. Thank you. We'll take a break and we'll come back. So I'd like to proceed with the last component of mindfulness, and that is relationship. Because this ultimately, in terms of what we described, is being able to be in the present moment, we understand, we have insight, we have wisdom to the nature of experience. And so where we're trying to go with mindfulness is the ability to be present with whatever we meet, with whatever we encounter, with a relationship that is one of non-attachment and compassion. That ability not to be free from pain and suffering, but the ability to be free to be with pain and suffering. It is a change in our relationship. Everything has value. And when we look at things that we encounter, we evaluate them. Are they good? Are they bad? Or are they neutral? So the question is, what defines value for us? Why is it that we want this, but we don't want that? So a large part of this is based on society, religious values, cultural values, parental values. Ever thought about this? Who decides that having an iPhone is something that we should have? Who decides that we should have this designer label pants or shoes? Is there some sort of central committee that says, you know what, society, here's what you should have, here's what you shouldn't have. This is what is going to make you happy. This is not what is going to make you happy. Everyone is able to be happy. Where is it written that we should be happy all the time? That if you don't have these objects, you will not be happy. And that who we are, according to our society, unfortunately, is defined by what we have and what we do, rather than who we are innately at our core. That perhaps the single most important thing we can understand is that our innate value is not dependent on external circumstances. That if we don't have X, Y, and Z, we're still good people. That if we ate that extra piece of chocolate cake, our behavior might not have been conducive to healthy eating, but that doesn't mean who we are is bad and without value. I think this is critical to understanding how we create our own misery. Because remember the question, who here chose their parents? Who here chose their biology? That we are reptilian brains. Who here chose your genetics? We had no choice. That we are who we are. We are still responsible for what we do. But we are still innately valued and valuable because we are humans, independent of all those things that we do that we frankly have no control over for the most part. And perhaps the most important thing that really dictates what we value as good or bad, desirable, is our need to feel safe, loved, and worthy. That is not those values that society places on us, but it is our core woundings that really decides whether something is good or bad, valuable or not. And I think the key thing to understand is that we should not judge our experiences as good or bad. That's not the way it should be viewed. It should be viewed as what is the meaning behind this? What is it telling me about who I am and how I am in this world? But we have to step beyond the sense of defining what's occurring in our minds as good or bad. We operate in this world as automatic robots. That's the way I see it. Do we have free will? I'm not sure we do. And the way we normally relate to whatever arises in our consciousness is either I see this as valuable, I have desire, I want more. I see this as not being valuable, aversion, I want to push it away. I see this as neutral, indifferent, it's neither good nor bad. But the key relationship that we are going to try and develop is a relationship of mindful non-attachment. Let's do this experiment, if I might. If we could all sit up and close our eyes. And just to get a flavor of how we normally automatically relate to our experience. Initially, I'd like you to bring to mind something that really is very, very positive for you. Partner, pet, work, food, holiday. And when you have that memory, what do you want to do with it? And I'll bring to memory something that isn't pleasant for you, something that you really don't want. Maybe it reflects work, relationship, finances, health. And what do you want to do with that as it arises? How do you relate to it? And now bring to mind an event that's very neutral to you. A stranger on the street, grass, a tree, rock, a floor. And how do you relate to this experience of something that really doesn't have a lot of energy or charge to it? It's not something you want, and it's not something you don't want. Let's bring that exercise to a close. So that was really meant to see how we automatically have relationships to what we are aware of. That a stimulus comes, that we evaluate it, it's good or bad or neutral, and what do we do with it? And either we grab on, we push it away, or we're neutral or But the question is, can we develop what is called mindful non-attachment. The beauty of mindfulness is that there is a freedom point, that there is the opportunity to have choice, that we don't necessarily have to operate like automatic robots. That a stimulus arises and we instantly evaluate it. Stimulus response. Viktor Frankl said between stimulus and response is a space. And in that space is choice. And in that choice is freedom. If we look at that a little bit more carefully, though, really what we're seeing is that there's this automatic stimulus and response. That our minds are so fast that when I bought the shirt, I automatically evaluate it as something as being bad. The freedom point then comes from my awareness, mindfulness, of knowing that there is this judgment. And then deciding, how am I going to relate to it? This is an unbelievable freedom point of mindfulness. Awareness gives you choice. What are we trying to develop? We're trying to develop a relationship that has acceptance, letting it go, and non-judgment. And frankly, those first three really don't truly grab the nature of non-attachment. I can accept whatever comes my way. I just won the lottery. You betcha, I'm grabbing onto that. Let go almost has this sense that I'm holding on to something and I'm releasing it. A mindful relationship, in essence, is one of non-attachment. That's very different than detachment. Detachment means you're pushing away something. Non-attachment means you are allowing whatever is present to be as it is, that there is no need to change it, that you're simply letting it be. And that is the essence of the relationship we are trying to develop with whatever we experience. Awareness and with non-attachment that ultimately leads to compassion. Let's try this experiment again, please. I would ask you to sit up straight and close your eyes. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to use language to see if we can shape our relationship with the present moment. And so the reason why non-attachment is so important is that no matter what we grab onto or push away is going to cause some pain and suffering. So just think, I got my new car. That's a positive thing. But then what happens? I'm really scared. It's going to get scratched. It's going to get dented. Oh my God, the brakes aren't working. I have to take it in. And so whatever we have, we're trying to protect, we're trying to defend, and we're holding on tightly. And that in itself causes pain and suffering. And it's the same with something we don't want. We're pushing it away, we don't want it. So what we're really trying to establish is a relationship of non-attachment. Because if it isn't something that we are clinging to, holding on to, or trying to push away, then we can hold it without having to suffer in being with it. So let's come back to that memory of something that you want. Something that you are craving or desiring. Bring that to mind. See it, hear it. Be with your response. How would you deal with it? And now ask yourself, what would a wise and compassionate choice be in this moment? And now bring to memory something that you don't want. Something you want to push away. And just be with that relationship in the moment. And now ask yourself the question, what would a wise and compassionate choice be in this moment? Let's bring that exercise to a close. You know, it's very interesting. There is a part of our brain that we can access that really knows what is a wise and compassionate choice, independent of our conditioning. That when we ask what needs to be done, that what is a wise and compassionate choice in this moment, an answer comes to you that really is wise and compassionate. It's as if you are going to that wise sage in your mind and asking the question. And there is an answer that comes. Problem is, how often are we willing to listen to it? We're much more likely to hold on to our fixed feelings and beliefs and criticisms and judgments. Because the essence of all of this, and this is critical, it's not that we view something as negative or positive. That the essence of the mindfulness and the relationship we have with each moment is non-preferential. That there is no evaluation of what is evaluated. How many of here have an experience? You're upset, you've criticized, you've judged, and then what does your mind do? It judges you for what you have just judged. That your mind evaluates your criticisms and your judgments. That the pain is expected, the suffering is optional. That your mind is giving you more suffering on top of what already is painful. So the essence of mindfulness is to be able to meet every experience, and whether that experience has been viewed as positive or negative. Can you simply be with what is, accept it for what it is, without judgment, without criticism, without clinging to it? And that, in the essence of mindfulness, is the freedom. And that's where you have the freedom of stress and suffering. And the reason why you are able to hold your experience in mindfulness non-attachment is because of insight and wisdom. In knowing that what has come into your awareness is made up, is an illusion, is a delusion. That the sense of I is fabricated, that it has just been layered over your belief system, that the I identifies with the belief system. They become intertwined. And that's why wisdom is the key to freedom. Because in understanding everything is constructed, everything is conditional, that this allows you to let it go. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Anton Bierce, an American, 1800s. I think that I think. Therefore I think that I am. So, how can we summarize mindfulness? I look at this as a process of honor. H means we are able to hold all of our experience, no matter what it is. We hear it. And really what we're hearing is we're hearing the voice of the child expressing its core woundings and vulnerabilities. We are giving it voice. We are validating it. We are hearing it. And in doing that, we offer the opportunity to heal the woundings. We are open to whatever comes into our awareness. There is nothing to change. We are simply letting things be. We come to this from the observing quality of mind. We know what we know. We're not the I that it is happening to, but we are the awareness that knows what is happening. Understanding, wisdom, insight. We understand the truth of our experience. And in doing that, we change our relationship. That we are able to be present with everything from non-clinging, non-attachment. And when there is no longer a defended sense of ego, where we no longer have to deal with everything we meet from protecting ourselves, those barriers fall away, and we can greet and meet everything with an open heart and compassion. So, in summary, the way to put all of this together is 3 key questions that you can ask in your experience. What is present? And then you label it. And in asking that question, you anchor yourself into the present moment. You create a pause. You know what you know. You step back. Second, what is present? In other words, you've identified fear. So now you're asking, what is fear? And in asking that question, you are demonstrating wisdom. Because when you turn to whatever your experience is and face it, often it dissolves like a dream. And what you're left with often is just the physical experience. Key, embody yourself in your experience. Step out of the story, step out of the emotions, rest in the body. And then the third component is relationship. That we are trying to create a mindful relationship of non-attachment, not desire, not aversion. And ask yourself, what would a wise and compassionate choice be in this moment? Because you have choice. I look at mindfulness as a process. In the beginning, we come to life as a closed fist. What we're doing is that we are armoring ourselves. We are protecting ourselves. We're protecting our core, vulnerable sense of self. The fist. Then we bring mindfulness into it. In the beginning, it's two fists meeting each other. Because in the beginning, frankly, it's kind of hard to have non-attachment and wisdom. What we're left with in the beginning is awareness. I'm aware that there's fear here, but there really isn't the receiving quality. Next, what we have is a fist held by an open hand. Because as we then develop awareness, we are able to be aware, we have insight into our experience, and we are able to hold it with non-attachment and compassion. And finally, we come to life from a place of intertwined hands. Because not only are we able to come from a sense of being, of holding our experience with awareness, insight, and compassion, but then we are able to act, to do from a place of awareness, insight, and compassion. Thank you.